Hello, and welcome to the Natural State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Gustin. It is my belief that the natural state of any living organism is health, and that our artificial habitat has forced us into having artificial health problems. This show is my attempt to dive deep and learn about using nutrition, sleep, movement, relationships, and more to help you reclaim your natural state of health in a modern world and show you how to thrive in an environment that's stacked against you. If you enjoyed today's show, you can find out more details and information at dranthonygustin.com. This week, I welcome on the podcast Josh Clemente, who is one of the founders of Levels, a new company that was founded to take on what I have been ranting about for years now, which is making continuous blood glucose monitoring accessible. So Josh has a really interesting background. He actually designed a lot of the life support systems for SpaceX originally, and the stuff that carried the astronauts up to space recently. We talk a little bit about that on the show, but more so his experience and why they think that a continuous blood glucose monitor is one of the most important tools that humans can have. And if you're new to the show, you may not know, but I have historically been very, very big on these products. I've been wearing a CGM now for on and off for several years, and it's really pissed me off how people can't access this technology. You can go to a Walgreens and buy a finger prick, but you can't get one that continuously monitors your blood glucose. This is unfortunate because this is where you get the most amount of data around what you should be eating, how food's affecting you. And when you shorten that feedback loop, you get a lot of behavior change in nutrition and health. So super important what they're doing. And as a full disclosure, I was one of the very early alpha testers of their product and loved it so much that I decided to become an early investor in the company, which allows me to get you guys some hookups to this product. So they currently have a 25,000 person wait list to be onboarded before their big launch later this year. But if you want to try out their products, you can just head to dranthonygustin.com/CGM and it will auto apply and skip you through that entire line so you can sign up and get a CGM right now without a doctor's prescription. So again, one of the biggest tools that I think are helpful as far as calibrating your own health. And I hope the conversation with Josh illuminates some of the ways that people can use this to help foster their own health. So tune in and I hope you guys enjoy. This episode of The Natural State is sponsored by Ned. Ned is an incredible company that makes a lot of CBD products, and you guys can probably go back to some of my episodes and realize that I have been a CBD skeptic for a very long time. I think that it's really hard in this industry that's exploding to have really high quality products that actually do anything. I tried a bunch of different CBD brands before this one, and unless they had THC in them as well, not enough to get high, but just enough to amplify the effects of CBD, I didn't feel anything until I tried Ned and then was completely blown away. I'd been using their products before they sponsored the show for about 4 to 6 months and have noticed a huge increase the nights that I use their product, about 25 milligrams, so 50 milligrams per night of the CBD. And I sleep way better. But then also the most interesting part is my HRV as tracked by my Oura Ring the next morning is about 20 points higher the day that I use CBD versus not. I also have not been doing a lot of social drinking as of this year. So anybody who's been following my stuff knows that I've sort of been taking the backseat to any sort of glass of wine here, drink there, to take the edge off. And the last few months, I'm sure everybody in the world feels a little stressed out. And I've been doing the same amount, like 25 to 50 milligrams to sort of replace that glass of wine to wind down and de-stress. And it's been pretty remarkable to pull down the edge and make sure that I can just like calm down at night with all that's going on in the world. The founders are amazing people. They really care about their supply chain, their sourcing. They do things the right way. And I asked them to hook you guys up with a little bit of a discount code. So if you want to try Ned out, just go to helloned.com/AG15 for 15% off and free shipping. That's HELLONED.com/AG15. That's AG15 for 15% off and free shipping. This show is also brought to you by Blue Blocks, blue light blocking glasses. Blue light is one of these things that a lot of people do not realize is completely trashing their sleep. So this is verified, at least for me. I looked at my Oura Ring, And anytime I get blue light exposure from devices past, say, 4 p.m., the latency, the time it takes for me to fall asleep, as well as my deep sleep are completely diminished. And when I wear glasses like Blue Blocks, it completely reverses that, and I can get a full rested sleep with no problem. There are a lot of brands out there right now that are trying to get on this trend of blocking blue light for good reason. And what happens is most of them are either really cheap and they break super easily, they are terrible looking and make you look like a freaking goon, or they actually just don't work. So I've tried some out that, are sort of a spectrum of any of these things, all the way to being so dark that I get headaches from wearing them. And what I like about Blue Blocks is it sort of addresses all of these things. So they're made actually in Australia, really, really high quality stuff. They have 20 plus different styles of each one. So no matter what sort of style fits your head and your face, my face is sometimes a little tough to make look good. So I'm glad they have options for me. But also they test all of their lenses to make sure that they meet specific criteria to block very specific wavelengths of light. And this is the important part here. Not a lot of brands do this. And so I've actually tested their side by side. I mean, you can do this as easily as just looking at a spectrum of blue, and you put on their glasses and you can't see the blue anymore. It goes completely black, or it has a shade of a gray, and this is what you want. And these guys who have done this company have done a phenomenal job at really sourcing the highest quality lenses, highest quality frames, and the ones that actually look good. So I'm not embarrassed when I put these on in public. And I asked them if they could hook you guys up, and they obliged. So 15% off is yours if you use code AG15. Also, you get free shipping. So if you want to, just head to BLUBLOX.com and use code AG15. That's blueblocks.com. Use code AG15 for 15% off and free shipping. Josh, thank you for joining me today.
It's great to speak. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's been a while, a couple of months. Your background, I'm sure we'll get into for a while, but I mean, I guess let's just start with your previous role, your company. I don't know if SpaceX was just right before this, but yeah, starting there, because I think that there's some big news in the last couple of months since we've chatted that I just want to ask you personal questions about.
Nice. Yeah. So SpaceX was not just prior to Levels, but it was about a year and a half prior to Levels. So I spent 6 years at SpaceX working on rocket systems, and then eventually I moved into the life support and astronaut development systems, and was able to lead a team developing pressurized life support equipment. So think breathing apparatus and things that keep the cabin of the vehicle pressurized, fire suppression equipment. And that was for the Crew Dragon vehicle, which just flew its inaugural mission to the ISS on May 27th with Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley.
Congrats, man. I mean, I was watching it live, as I know a lot of people were, and I assume that you were.
Absolutely.
That was, it's on the team, but I'm sure a lot of the work that you did was instrumental in setting the groundwork to get to the point where you're at. I mean, I'm sure even like a year ago or whatever, it's like there's probably not many tweaks that you're making to the systems that you're working on anymore.
Yeah. So I kind of pushed that program to the critical design review phase, which is where you kind of lock the designs down and then you go into production mode. And at that point, like I said, I'd been there about 6 years. I started to have these other interests that I wanted to explore, entrepreneurial, and just felt like that now's the time. And so I do feel, it was kind of a bittersweet experience to watch from a distance, but at the same time, it was amazing to be a part of the program, be able to contribute and watch that success happen. And looking forward to having those guys come back down from the space station in a few weeks.
Yeah. Is that still like another, let's wait and see what happens?
For sure. Yeah. There are other systems involved there. And, it's kind of the development projects I was working on have, different failure modes that occur on ascent versus on reentry and landing. And so, so far everything's been just flawless from what I can tell and all the info I'm getting. So it's amazing, but still a bit of a nail biter until they're back on solid ground.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm sure you have tons of coworkers and friends that are still at the company.
Yeah. Super embedded there. My sister still works there. And awesome. So we've got big SpaceX family.
And I'm sure everybody was just thrilled how it went.
Yeah. I mean, it was just wild to see, this is the first new spacecraft that can carry astronauts since essentially 1980 when the space shuttle rolled out. So it's just kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity to be able to be a part of that. And then also to see the kind of evolution of spacecraft design. If you look at the interior of the Crew Dragon versus the cockpit of the shuttle or the Soyuz capsules, it's clearly an evolutionary step. And I think it's just exciting to see the future kind of coming together a little bit, and to be optimistic again about the American space program, and not just American space program, but just space in general. I'm a huge space nerd, and can't wait to see more. I hope competition heats up and we get more vehicles available and start to have space tourism and moon bases and things like this. Stuff you read about and think about, but don't believe it'll ever happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's wild. I was actually on a plane before quarantine hit, before lockdown happened. And I looked as I was boarding or exiting, I don't know which it was, I was looking into the cockpit, and it looked like a video game machine from like 1974. I'm like, how? I mean, it's the same thing you see, but just in a little bit smaller scale of the old
right.
you're referring to. It's like, how have we not got, like, even the or like 8-bit, just only green, you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, 100%. I totally know what you mean.
Great, like, technology and taking any more steps forward. Like, should I feel safe on this thing?
Yeah. Well, it's amazing. Like, the one of the big efforts that we had on the Dragon program was convincing the sort of entrenched aerospace that it is a good idea to have the vehicle fly itself, essentially, and to have the crew members interact with the vehicle through touch screens. So that was a big, kind of a heavy lift, because the technology is there and we're very confident that it would work. But people are very familiar with buttons and tactile feedback and pilots, moving instrumentation to make things work. And it's just like, computers are really good at this stuff now. And for the most part, airplanes fly themselves and land themselves. And there's no reason the spacecraft should be different. Of course, there has to be emergency systems that astronauts can step in and take the wheel, so to speak, if necessary. But for the most part, the goal for that development project was that from launch until docking with the International Space Station, it's entirely autonomous. And that was successful. So the crew they played around with the controls and kind of navigated the spacecraft for a little while in orbit. But then they re-entered autonomous mode, and the whole docking procedure was entirely done, through pre-programmed algorithms, essentially. So we have the capability; it's happening, and it's exciting because you don't have to be a traditionally trained astronaut really to go to space now, right? You can just climb aboard and be a passenger. So that's just it's a paradigm shift.
Yeah, it's a big step. Were there people who were concerned that, like, the touch screen freeze, they wouldn't be able to do anything? Or, I mean,
totally. Yeah. And there are tons of valid concerns with that. There are always going to be these unknowns that can crop up, but you can quantify them fairly well, and you can develop what's called fitter responses, so fault detection and response. And you can figure out ways to be able to have an alternative, all the way through 2 degrees of failure, where you have backup systems that are analog. And so that's kind of the process of developing one of these programs over many years, is fully, painting in the picture of how faults trickle down to each other and what states the machine can end up in and how you can get out of it. And so once you kind of go through that process, you can convince yourselves and then in this case, the customer, NASA, that it's a good idea and that the risk is tolerable and things will work. And so that was basically my job to some extent, was doing the same thing with life support systems.
Yeah. Congrats, man. Huge success. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Obviously took a very hard turn after that. And I think have really shifted your priorities and what you're working on. And, obviously, like you said, getting into space is a huge deal, and it's a crazy accomplishment, but now sort of like really shifting gears. So maybe just like a brief overview of Levels and what you guys founded there, and then we'll sort of chat in between and what got you from SpaceX to there.
Totally. Yeah. So Levels is the metabolic fitness company. So the goal is to connect people with their own real-time biological information so that they can make data-driven decisions. And that kind of sounds like a bunch of words, but what we're primarily doing is getting real-time continuous glucose monitoring into the world of wellness and performance optimization. So you can tap into a data stream from your body and see the reactions to the actions you take every day. So you sit down, you eat something for lunch, you see how that affected you in terms of your glucose control, which has these downstream effects on the hormones and the sort of weight gain, weight loss, performance in exercise, all of these downstream effects that we experience, but now you can get a data stream for. And so we're developing the data analytics system and the sort of program that allows you to get access to the hardware, work with it for a month or multiple months, and index on metrics and reports that can help you understand how to improve, not just monitor a raw data stream.
Right. And what you guys are doing mostly with right now is continuous blood glucose monitor.
That's right.
Right, which is something that, I started wearing one a couple of years ago, got a prescription, super, super expensive. Interfaces are terrible, and I'd love to get into what makes you guys different. But I guess before we do that, would love to hear, I've already heard your story before, that's why I'm super excited to have you on, but just your sort of initial thoughts of this and how you guys sort of pulled it together and how you went from being obsessed with the tech and life support systems to health and sort of made that your priority.
Yeah. So it was a personal experience that led to what was ultimately Levels. And so while I was at SpaceX, actually, I was exposed to, in the world of life support systems, you're talking a lot about performance, but you're also talking about worst case scenarios. And it's not okay for a crew member to have to come down with, a sudden illness, but it's also not okay for a crew member to have long-term, chronic illness set in when they're on orbit, right? You don't have emergency services, you don't have traditional medical care. And so, thinking about how they approach their wellness leading up to their missions multiple years in advance, there's a lot of biomarkers, there's a lot of monitoring, and there's also a lot of really cool research. There's a lot of people thinking about how are we going to do this for multiple years. And one of those people is Don Biagostino. He works with NASA on some really cool long duration experiments. And I read a paper from him it was a study in rats that showed this amazing central nervous system protection in a ketogenic state against basically convulsions caused by high pressure oxygen environments. So this is something I was actually dealing with and designing around. And I read this study and it was like, man, this ketogenic state is actually protective. It can introduce multiple hours of additional longevity life in this like emergency situation just by simply modifying the macronutrients that these animals are consuming. And you can, of course, extrapolate that to divers and astronauts. And that was the first moment where I kind of was hit in the face with the potential for diet to have essentially superhuman physiologic impacts. And I had never really thought that way in my life. I was always kind of a calories in, calories out person. If you work out hard and you keep your body fat low, you're going to be in good health. And so that was kind of a screeching moment for me. It was like, I actually have no idea, or I've never thought about this. And now it's something I have to take seriously. And how am I going to do that? I don't know how to select for diet. I don't know how to optimize. Should I just go full keto? If so, how do I know it's working? All these questions started bubbling up. And so I kind of went down a rabbit hole, started researching physiology and metabolism, and just kind of realized there are two primary energy substrates in the body, right? It's glucose and fat. And one of those, there's amazing technology coming available called continuous glucose monitor. And I need this. I need to start measuring this substrate and see if I can start to improve my own slowly flagging mood and energy issues that have just as I get older, I've just started to notice. And so ultimately, after kind of seeing that research and slowly noticing my fatigue levels are getting worse, I'm dependent on coffee in a very detrimental way. I feel terrible in the middle of the afternoon, no matter how hard I work out in the morning. I ultimately got my hands on a continuous glucose monitor and found that I was either borderline or full-blown pre-diabetic, depending on who you ask. And that was kind of a life-changing moment for me, because I had been painstakingly formulating whole foods meals and certainly thought I was doing everything right and buying good ingredients. And all of this traditional sort of fitness culture advice of carb loading after workouts and making sure you get your glycogen replenished and all these things were floating around in my brain. And I was eating based on these heuristics that had no grounding in data. And it was causing me to be sick. I was pushing myself into this pre-diabetic state. And again, another life-changing moment. And so from that point on, I just dug deeper in the research and saw there's a huge opportunity to improve lives, turn around the metabolic outcomes we are seeing in this country and globally by just giving people better information. So,
so when was that moment when you were the holy shit moment for you?
That was in 2018.
Yeah.
And this was shortly after I had left SpaceX and I had a little extra time to start experimenting. And I was actually at that time trying a plant-based diet. So essentially I had made the decision to find out how I can optimize my diet and to take quantitative measurements. So I was using a finger prick glucometer because I had been turned down for a CGM by several physicians. So I was pricking my finger up to 60 times a day. And I was I'm going to start with a plant-based diet and work my way to full carnivore if that's what it takes. But I'm just going to use data to try and figure out what's best for me. And, trying to maintain my weight and, quote unquote carb load and keep my glycogen up after workouts, I was eating, quite a large serving of like brown rice or sweet potatoes after every meal or during every meal. And, my glucose levels would be, like I said, elevated in the pre-diabetic or in some cases like over 180 for multiple hours. And then they'd come crashing back down. And those crashes were perfectly synced with my like 2 p.m., where's the coffee moments, or, feeling like I needed to grab a nap. And it was like, just it was an immediate feedback loop thing, right? So you close the loop between action and reaction. You see that this is happening. You understand, what's normal, what's optimal, and what's suboptimal. And you just realize that these little decisions you're making can be improved. And the numbers tell you the whole story.
Right. I mean, this is one of the examples that I use all the time is that, for me, when I eat wheat or anything like that, like gluten containing, I will get acne within 2 to 3 days. But the feedback loop is so long and I eat so much and so many things can happen that it's so tough to tell. I didn't understand this for about 10, 15 years. And then I got a test and said I'm sensitive to these types of proteins. And I go, oh, okay, I'll just take them out. And if I was getting acne like right when I was eating bread, I go, oh shit, I'm not going to eat this anymore. And like you said, the feedback loop mechanism here of continuous blood glucose monitor is the most important thing, because people can then start realizing and just seeing numbers and see what's going on inside their body at any given time. So like you said, you're able to look at, oh, I feel like I need a coffee right now. I feel like I need to recharge myself. I have this lack of energy, or I'm hungry, or I'm angry, or whatever. Yet your blood glucose is like peaked at 180 for several hours.
Right.
Oh, okay. And yeah, I mean, I think with you especially, I think a lot of people don't realize it's not like you're overweight. I mean, you're a super fit guy. And so it's tough to sort of have a cognitive association between there's something wrong with me inside when outside you look so healthy. And I think that, even with a lot of stuff right now with coronavirus sweeping through and decimating a lot of people who look otherwise healthy from the outside, well, metabolically, they're completely trashed. And we've seen data come out that people have far worse outcomes when their metabolism isn't allowed to basically get out of the way and mount an immune response.
Right.
And so yeah, I mean, I think it's critical that some people who otherwise all signs are that they're healthy, and maybe you attributed before, oh, I'm just like tired because I'm working so much, or because I'm doing hard workouts, or I'm not getting enough sleep. And sometimes it's just as simple as, oh, I'm not digesting this food properly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's really amazing. It's completely changed my perspective on the way that the human body thermodynamically processes and produces energy. I used to be, like I said, that calories in, calories out person who thinks that we're just a perfect machine, and you put a certain amount of energy in, you will get that amount of energy out, whether through heat, mechanical lifting of weights, or what have you. But now the realization is actually we're like this wet chemistry set, and the way that our bodies metabolize, turn our food and environment into energy is actually a very complex process using chemicals like hormones. And the amount and duration and sort of internal environment of those chemical balances is what dictates the amount of energy that's released into our cells or produced in the cells in the mitochondria or outside mitochondria. And it's far from a clean balance, like a closed form equation. So just like becoming more realistic about that, and then digging into the effects of insulin, for example, which is, as an anabolic hormone, it's sort of like it's the bulking hormone, right? It's what causes us to store things. And when you are in a hyperinsulinemic environment, your body physically cannot tap into its available energy stores. So you are storing glycogen, you are storing fat, and you are unable to oxidize the fat stores that you already have. And so this, in the worst case scenarios for people who have very advanced metabolic syndrome, they can have hundreds of pounds of fat on their bodies, topped off glycogen stores, and yet have absolutely no energy available because their insulin levels are so high and they can't tap into that energy store. So they'll be laying on the couch and have a respiratory quotient of 1, meaning they're literally burning sugar as though they're sort of in a full-on sprint, the way an elite athlete would be sort of tapped out at the high end of their output. That this is a person who's at complete stasis. And it completely changed my, perspective on I suppose on this whole like balance of responsibility. I certainly feel completely differently about metabolic syndrome and obesity, and all the equation there is very tricky to solve. And it's so hard with our current food environment to understand because of all this contradictory information and lack of information. It's so hard to understand what's actually happening. You have a bunch of dogma and, all of it contradicts, and you can end up in this person who is like basically a giant fuel storage depot. Like, you have all the energy available, but you can't tap into it because the hormonal environment's backwards.
Right.
So,
yeah. And like you said, it is like calories in and calories out. There are certainly an input and an output. Yep. In the body as a machine, but it's not like a closed system bomb calorimeter where we're just measuring that input and output in isolation.
Exactly. Yeah. And there is, it's totally a solution. Your body can solve the thermodynamic equation by just storing fat. Like, it's now potential energy. But, the calories in, calories out philosophy assumes that if you just walk a certain distance, you will use a certain number of calories. But that is not necessarily the case. Like, you have people effectively starving. They are experiencing the effects of starvation, and yet the reason is that all the energy is going into fat stores, and it's not available to tap into to power their cells. And it's a very strange realization that like this can happen. It is happening, and I think to some extent it was happening for me. What was happening with me, it was just long elevations in glucose, and I wasn't gaining fat necessarily very quickly. But my fatigue levels were extreme. And in retrospect, now after bringing my glucose control into control, I can stay plus or minus 10 points on my blood sugar day in and day out if I put the effort in. And now I just have this flat, consistent output of energy day in and day out. Like, I don't drink coffee after 11 a.m. And that's, if I want to, I'll have one, but it's a total indulgence where it used to be an absolute requirement. I was just sipping it like, it was my lifeblood for every single workday. And the consistency there is certainly due, in my opinion, to these hormonal fluctuations that I've taken out of the system by stopping that like massive kick to a dynamic system that I was doing at every single meal repeatedly day in, day out.
Right. Yeah. And I think that with weight loss in particular, it's so frustrating for so many people just because, they are calories in, calories out. They are big inputs, are big outputs. And for some people that does work to just shift that. And I would argue that those people are already probably metabolically pretty well off. And I think that probably the most intelligent way to approach it is assess for metabolic flexibility first, and then sort of try to dictate what are the bigger things that are causing the weight gain in people. Is it a hormone-based thing? Are they eating too much? Are they eating the wrong times? Are they not moving their body? What's their inflammatory status? All these things sort of are at least incorporated or should be. So that's why, I really enjoy what you guys are doing, sort of bringing this to the forefront. And you didn't have a lot of weight to lose. So like you said, energy was a big one, but what are the other things that you noticed when you started getting this under control? What were the foods that you changed? And then what did you notice from that as far as a benefit? Was it mood, energy, satiation, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. So I would say the biggest one besides energy is the newfound independence from food and diet generally. So I think that's a satiation question, but I was in college, I was an athlete. After college, I worked out, religiously, and I was always the like 5 or 6 meals a day type of person, just constantly eating. And, that was my way of keeping my metabolism running, so to speak. And I was, in retrospect, like completely addicted to the process of eating and concerned about, like, very, very reliant on food being available all the time. It was like when's my next meal coming in? And I had this fear of missing a meal, and almost like an existential fear, like I'm not going to make it if I skip lunch or something. This has to happen. I'd get very unhappy if I was going to miss a meal. And now, like having the metabolic flexibility, tapping in, I think rebalancing the equation more towards fat than glucose. I've experimented with extended fasts. I'm still, fairly new to the world of fasting, but overall, I now practice, some intermittent fasting daily. I won't eat typically until afternoon. And if I need to, and by the way, there are no negative side effects to this. I can now go a full day focusing on whatever it is that I'm focused on, whether that's traveling or work or what have you. I can completely ignore food until the end of the day, get in the appropriate macronutrient balance or meals that I want to eat rather than having to grab what's available. And feeling that independence is really amazing. And it's also a sense of empowerment over your physiology. You're safe. And I think the glucose data that we produce is really one of the main keys to understanding this, is realizing you're not going to go into some sort of hypoglycemic state and pass out if you were to miss a meal. And anyone who's practiced fasting knows this, but watching glucose hit a low, flat, controlled output as your body taps into its glycogen stores and then taps into gluconeogenesis as necessary to keep you running. And then, seeing ketones come up and just watch your body do its thing and realize, that the crazy hormones that drive hunger are completely out of the equation when you eliminate these roller coasters of constant eating and constant, in my opinion, constant high glycemic kicks, which are very closely related with me to hunger. Right. So yeah, bringing that hunger and satiety equation into balance, and then to another extent, I think my sleep is just far better than it ever has been. And I still am taking a lot of data here, and this is something that Levels is looking into, is bringing sleep data, heart rate variability, and recovery into the picture with glucose. And there's a ton to learn here, but I really think the overnight glucose dysfunction that I had previously was closely correlated with a lot of heart rate variations and poor light sleep. And so now I get much more deep sleep, and I also get I think more restful sleep as a result of not having large carb-filled meals towards the end of the day. And so yeah, I think that's also benefited my mood in the downstream. Just waking up rested rather than groggy and unhappy. So there's been a lot of secondary and tertiary effects that it's kind of hard to fill in the whole picture. But I'd say the biggest ones, the most obvious ones, are that food freedom and energy balance.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a lot of this stuff can go pretty cyclical as well, where you make one positive change and it keeps going. Same thing with all the negative changes. So when you first got I guess you weren't even using a CGM at this time, you're just doing finger pricks, but would you just say, okay, my goal is to not have any spike in my blood glucose? Or was it, here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, a delta of not more than 40 milligrams per deciliter, or was it a certain time? How did you think about your blood sugar rising and falling, and how do you think about it now? Has it shifted?
Yeah. So when I first got a CGM, when I first started pricking my finger, like you said, I was just looking for a pattern and trying to see, was I outside of the ADA, American Diabetes Association, normal range? And I was seeing a lot of outside the ADA normal range. So it was kind of a scatter plot of random points. And that's the problem with these single point measurements like a glucometer. And so I was like, this is weird. There's a lot of spikes, a lot of drops. I don't know what's going on. I'm not going to prick my finger every 3 minutes. And so that led me to really want this continuous glucose monitor even more. When I did eventually get the monitor, I started to quickly see that I was not staying within the ADA normal range, right? So I was waking up over 100, 115 milligrams per deciliter in the mornings. And then after lunches and dinners, my glucose would be over 160, over 180 milligrams per deciliter for hours. And the top, basically the American Diabetes Association says, normally you will not exceed 140, except in rare cases. And so seeing that I was not just exceeding, but maintaining glucose levels well above that for multiple hours was a total shock. And I wasn't even trying to optimize. I was just trying to compare myself to the nominal average. And so, that's when I started to really get serious and dig deep into the studies and figure out, okay, I'm not concerned about normal now. I'm concerned about optimal. I want to be every single day improving myself based on my dietary decisions, not damaging my longevity and my goals. And so I discovered Peter Attia and started digging more into Dom D'Agostino's work. And Peter Attia talks a lot. He's a diehard CGM user. I think he's been using one now for like 5 years. And he talks a lot about maintaining an average of around 90 milligrams per deciliter, plus or minus like standard deviation of like 15 milligrams per deciliter. And so I started to gravitate towards that, trying to exert maximal control over my glucose curve, lower, flatter, fewer spikes. And by doing so, that brought me towards sort of high protein, moderate fat, minimizing grains, minimizing dairy in many cases. I've since added a lot more dairy back in because I tolerate it fairly well. And that's kind of how I still am to this day. So a lot of leafy green vegetables, fats and protein. And with that sort of macronutrient balance, I certainly don't strive for like a ketogenic diet. I will do cycles of keto, but in general, I'm just shooting for what we at Levels have since determined to be closer to optimal than the American Diabetes Association ranges, which are between 70 and 110 milligrams per deciliter, 24/7, including meals. So, there's a lot that goes into that. We're going to continue to update these ranges based on new research, both internally and externally. But that seems to be, based on what we've seen, the lowest risk, sort of set of glycemic responses. It is least associated with long-term sort of cardiovascular dysfunction, diabetes risk, and these other things like mood dysfunction and weight gain.
So how many carbs are you eating now? Still, you said you don't really strive for a ketogenic diet, but you've just found sources that are good for you to stay within that 70-110 range.
Yeah, so I'll eat on the order of about 80 to 120 grams of carbs a day, including typically I get these mostly from like cashews, nuts sources, and then I will have, after workouts in particular, I will have like sweet potatoes, and a small quantity for sure compared to how I used to eat them. But then in the mornings, I have like a kind of a Greek yogurt with berries, and it'll either be blueberries or strawberries, which I tolerate really well. And I'll also have chia seeds, flax seeds, which have carbohydrates. So a lot of seeds, nuts, and fibrous fruit. And then again, some vegetables that are higher in carbohydrates, but like sweet potatoes will be mostly my only starch that I'll lean on.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many surprises that a way for like looking at things individually. And this is why I think people, maybe hear this podcast and go, oh, I'm going to eat these things now. I'm sure you guys see it within the team all the time and the users that you have, that one person can eat exactly what you just said and be completely destroyed.
Yeah, exactly. There's some pretty profound research, and just for the audience's sake, there are a few studies. You've probably talked about them on the show, but the landmark paper was in the Cell journal by the Weizmann Institute in 2015, and it took 800 people without diagnosed metabolic dysfunction and gave them continuous glucose monitors. And that data was like shocking because it showed that two people can eat the exact same two foods. In this case, it was a banana and a cookie made with wheat flour, and those two people could have equal and opposite responses to those two foods. So it's not that they had varying levels of response. It was that one person was like straight up flat on the banana and had a huge spike from the cookie, and the other person had a huge spike from the cookie and nothing from the banana. And so this is like demonstrating the personal variations here that are driving our glycemic responses, and ultimately will drive the hormones that are, for example, associated with weight gain. So people who are trying a one-size-fits-all diet are going to run into this personal variation, which could be from stress, it could be from microbiome, it could be genetics. It's not entirely clear yet. But what we do know is that it exists, and that without the real-time data, in this case, glucose data, you really can't know who you are on this spectrum and how you should be eating in order to be optimal. So that study has since been either replicated or supplemented by like the PREDICT trials in London, Glucotype's trial at Stanford, and hopefully many more that will be coming soon as CGM becomes more available.
Yeah, I mean, becoming more available is what you guys are all about, which is what's so exciting for me, why I love what you guys are doing. And like you said before, I had a friend who just wrote me a script for a CGM for a while. You said you went to multiple physicians and could not get access to one. And the fact that we can't get access to this via a continuous measurement, but we can go prick our fingers 800 times a day, no problem. And also the cost difference it is between, like, if you don't have insurance and you're getting it, it's is insane. So the fact that you guys are tackling that is huge. Kudos to you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the accessibility issue is complicated for sure, and every CGM that's out there is prescription only, and like you said, it's an interesting risk problem here because if you want to get access to your glucose measurements, you can go to CVS and pick up a finger prick monitor and stab yourself and bleed on your fingertips, which are exposed to infection, and you got to do that a few hundred times really to get enough data points to really understand how your glucose levels are changing. Or you wear this patch, CGM, which has a little filament in the skin. It is minimally invasive, but there's no blood involved for 90% of installations. And you wear it continuously for 14 days at a time. And there's no break, there's no capillary blood, there's minimal infection risk, basically zero pain. And you have a full-time data stream, right? While you're sleeping, while you're exercising, while you're eating, you are recording this information. And so the quality of the data and the sort of the output of that is a much more resolute picture of how you are actually responding. You're a dynamic system, right? We in modern America, we use a single finger prick, fasting glucose measurement, or an A1C test, which is an approximation of average glucose to determine whether or not your metabolism is functioning well. And most people do that once a year at best. And, to me, that these screening measures are poor, first of all, to see whether there's dysfunction. But even worse, that has zero utility for optimization. You cannot check a single point measurement once per year and make improvements based on that. All you're doing is waiting for yourself to violate a threshold and then call yourself sick. And, so what we want to do is not just enhance availability of this information for screening and avoiding risk, but also for the optimization of our performance. We want elite athletes like Anthony Kunkel, who's using our system right now. He's a fat optimization endurance athlete, ultra runner, and he's already having breakthrough realizations by using continuous glucose information. And so everyone across the spectrum of metabolic fitness can use this same information for their goals. Again, whether that's weight loss or shaving a few seconds off your 50K time. It's all the energy substrate of the body that we're measuring in real time. It's so much more utilitarian than these sort of finger prick measures.
Right. And I mean, another thing that is awful about the current offering is just that, if I just use the Libre Freestyle app, the interface and what you can do with it and what you can actually learn and use as a way to generate that better feedback loop is brutal. It's like, I mean, I don't know if they just have no incentive to make it better, and the people that use the product just don't care. But I mean, you scan, you essentially can't see any data unless you pull it out in a spreadsheet and look at it. And you guys, like, I've been using your product for, I don't know what, like 5-6 months now. And just to see the amount of progress you've made in the additions to things that, you can log meals, look at these changes, you can actually look at your data in real time. It's phenomenal.
Awesome. Well, I love to hear that you're loving it. And yeah, we've released hundreds of iterations in the time that you've been on. But we see an extremely bright roadmap. I mean, we have some amazing product concepts for the future, bringing in additional analytes and metrics like tapping into your exercise. So pulling in and surfacing insights based on how you respond to the same food with no exercise afterwards versus with a walk afterwards. These are really profound levers that you can pull on. And so the software will eventually be able to identify these personal responses and the variations among them and give you these low-hanging fruit sort of micro optimizations to improve. And, so definitely, the technology was developed for an extremely important reason. It was developed to help those with diabetes monitor and manage their condition. But, the glucose breakdown that is most associated in our society with long-term issues is caused by chronic lifestyle choices. So that would be like the type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes. So there are 30 million people in the US with type 2 diabetes, 90 million with pre-diabetes. And of those 90 million, 90% don't know they have a problem. And so the CDC estimates that those 90 million people, like 70% of them are going to end up being type 2 diabetic by 2035 if they don't do something now. So, our hope here is that this information, this data, this technology, by becoming more consumer friendly and having an elegant user interface and, these machine learning algorithms on the background that can help you just like surface and make better choices, we can kind of avert disaster in terms of metabolic outcomes in the country, because people will be, you might be optimizing towards just better energy levels like I was, but that qualitative focus can also come with a quantitative benefit of lowering your long-term risk of this really bad metabolic breakdown. And so that's what we're going for, is like, tap into this desire to feel better, look better, experience life every day better, and come along with, this longevity improvement. So yeah, it's important that the product is exceptional and elegant to use, and we're doing everything we can to take this amazing medical technology and make it, the next consumer frenzy.
Yeah. I mean, it's clearly the number one problem to be solving right now for health of Americans, especially. I mean, in the Western world in general. And COVID brought that to light, like we were talking about earlier, just the fact that even if you do not have any weight issues and you think you're otherwise healthy, disease can rip through and really test your metabolic health. And so being able to put this out there and wake people up. I don't know what the latest stat is, but I know it's always hovering around between 80 and 90% of people are metabolically dysfunctional in this country.
Yeah.
It's just shocking. And I think that, no solution's perfect right now. And I've had some friends who have gotten CGMs and then they, eat a bunch of garbage food and they go, look, it didn't raise my blood sugar, so therefore it's good for me. I think that there's also a qualitative section here where we could always dive into. But I mean, I think that just, even if people were eating garbage food, but their metabolism was working better, I would say probably a step in the right direction from where we're at right now.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. Like the local optimization, taking a single data stream and optimizing that is never going to be the full picture. And so that's why, I was talking about just bringing in more analytes as they become available. I'm optimistic about the future of real-time monitoring equipment. I think we're going to have several new analytes on the market in the next few years. And so, the goal for Levels is to be, again, the metabolic fitness company and to bring in, as more of this information becomes available, maybe we can measure free fatty acids or lactic acid or potentially even hormones like insulin in real time. We will use that to fill in machine learning models of you, the individual, and how you are metabolizing and tapping into the energy sources, storing fat and feeling. And so ultimately, I'm really optimistic for the future where you can much more like, the way you treat financial information. You pull out your phone, you can check out your bank account balance and your deposits and withdrawals and stuff and have a prediction for the future. You should be able to do the same thing with your body's real-time biodata and, use this as a daily decision-making machine rather than kind of guess and check, doing what the internet tells you or asking a friend what worked for them. You should be making data-driven decisions based on your information. And we don't want to imply that improving glucose levels is the only thing that matters. It certainly is it's a high gain lever, especially in modern society where we have such a processed food supply, but it's not perfect. Like you said, there are certain people who maybe already have a hyperinsulinemia situation or, maybe some other underlying metabolic conditions that we really don't quite understand yet that might not see a big response to a food that would spike someone else. And so we're still learning as well and really looking forward to contributing to the state of our understanding as a society.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys can whip together an inflammatory proxy or some sort of marker that you can measure in real time, I think that would be huge too. Like something to out vegetable oil.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a big one.
My dream. Because nobody even knows it's in their food. No one knows how destructive it is and how long it can be in your body for. But yeah, I think that like the individuality as well in making sure that people even retest over time. My tolerance to certain carbohydrates right now is far different than it was 2 years ago. And for whatever reason, if that's my metabolism is different or my microbiome is different or my activity level is different or my muscle mass is different or my exercise is different, it doesn't matter. I mean, there's so many things that could change that even what works for you today may not work for you in 3, 4, 5, 6 years.
Totally.
So there's always tinker. I mean, that's why I'm wearing one right now. And like, I don't think that, Peter T, like you said, has been wearing one for 5, 6 years. It's just, you never stop learning with this stuff and your body never stops changing. So why would you not want data? Like continue.
Totally.
It's just So
what direction did your sensitivities move like to carbs? Are you better or worse at tolerating them now?
Better. I think just testing more as well. And it seems like it's before I was really overweight when I was younger. So before it was just like when I first started getting into keto stuff 5-6 years ago plus, I would react pretty negatively to almost all carbohydrates. And now I've noticed that it's like I don't know, 50-50 shot whether I try carbohydrate and it reacts negatively or not. So I would say I've gained some capacity. And then, we talked a little bit about the Q&A episode I did with Chris on this podcast a couple episodes ago. And I think that there's been certainly, now it's been even, 4 months since we started doing that. I'm starting to see things creep up a little bit. So I'm going to go back to doing keto for a little while and see how that resets things. So again, I just think that things change all the time, and things you can learn are just always different. And as well, I've noticed when the heat has gone up here in Austin, my sensitivity has also improved when that goes up. So I don't know if it's just I'm sweating more, my blood flow is moving more.
Interesting.
Weird things. I'm super excited to see what you guys are going to be able to pull from the data when you've been at this for 3, 4, or 5 years. It's going to be fascinating.
Oh yeah. So I have a similar situation. Like my carb tolerance is definitely improved, and it's not so much I will still have a large I'll have a big response or spike typically to a large portion of carbs, but I will return to baseline much faster than I used to. And so I think my insulin response and sensitivity is improving, but it's great. That point that you just mentioned about as the heat, as it's warming up, you've seen a better response. I was just listening to Ben Pakulski, and he has some really interesting seasonal theories about diet. And so there's definitely a relationship, it seems like, between vitamin D and carb metabolism. And I'm wondering if it's maybe, are you getting more sun? Are you outside more? And maybe that has something to do with it. And the temperature is rising, but perhaps it's that vitamin D mechanism, which I certainly I'm not an expert on, but
it's starting to get a time in Austin where I'm actually inside more because it's so
really? Okay. So not that.
Trying to get in shade more. But yeah, I think just looking at what foods are available, what times of year as well. More carbohydrates are going to be available now. Every week I go to the farmer's market, there's more fruits, more things like this that are coming ripe. So I've always thought too of seasonality being part of people's diets, and eating local and seasonal as much as you possibly can is probably going to be the best thing to match your environment.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I think what's most important here is just, and I loved your Q&A with Chris, the getting rid of dogma. It's really hard. Food and religion are very closely tied, I think, and people get very embedded in their philosophy towards eating. And, so with levels, we want to just maintain an independence from any sort of dogmatic approach to the diet philosophy, and instead just have the thesis here is that whatever your dietary philosophy is, it should be grounded in data. And ideally that's your data, not, an average of somebody else from a different background. And so I think this will be key to being able to establish, a circadian or seasonal approach to eating instead of this, all or nothing sort of binary approach where you're either eating fat or carbs, you're either eating, keto or low fat, whatever it is. So I'm optimistic for the future as well. And it's really cool to see all of these different movements kind of converging, I think, on the realization that better information is key. We really can't make these decisions without better data.
Good point, man. Before we wrap it up, I have a question for you. When are you guys going to be able to let people sign up and get this thing? I've referred so many people to you.
Oh man.
Everyone's like, man, I'm on the waiting list. I can't get it.
I'm sorry to those people. Yeah, we are moving. We're trying as hard as we can to get to rolling out pre-orders and then a full launch. So pre-orders this summer, and our full launch we're shooting for in the early fall. And the pre-order system, you'll be able to grab a reservation for the program. We're conducting this beta right now, basically, and the goal here is to get to a degree of product experience where people can easily understand and make behavioral changes that are improving their metabolic control. And we're seeing really great signals that we're essentially there. And a key metric here is the rankings or scores that you get in the app, and then also our reporting, which sort of brings all of this together into a weekly and then a monthly report so people can understand how they're trending. And so we're starting to see signals. The beta program is pretty intensive. We have quite a few interviews with most of the people that participate. So it's definitely a development product, and all of the enthusiasm is amazing. And I think we'll be able to open up the program, hoping in 4-6 weeks. That's optimistic. Don't hold me to that timeline, but we're doing the best we can to scale.
Okay. Well, whenever you guys do, let me know. I'll put it in my email newsletter and people can sign up. But
Amazing.
I mean, just super grateful for all the work you guys are doing. You're tackling a huge problem that I think I've mentioned on this podcast about 55 times, that I hope somebody built a company so I don't have to. And you and the team are much smarter than me, so I think you're gonna do an even better job than I would have. So
you guys have been just amazing supporters. The whole Perfect Keto crew, and the first of all, the products you guys make are amazing. Equip, same deal. Like I've been experimenting with your stuff, and it's just amazing to see high quality foods coming to the forefront that make a claim and back it up. And like we can back that up with data as well. Like I know that Perfect Keto bars are the best thing out there in terms of my own glucose response. So if I'm looking for a low glycemic snack to power me through the day, that's what I go for. And I think that we can, by collaborating with people like yourselves who are super driven for the same mission, but kind of in an adjacent space, like we can really make a movement out of this thing. I'm stoked for it. Thank you for being strong supporters.
Yeah, you got it. And like you said, and if your data shows otherwise and our products aren't the best for you, like that, I don't care. Like I want to be non-dogmatic as well. Like I just developed them to be as good for most amount of people. And if it doesn't happen for you, then great, go find whatever works for you. Yeah, it's the great thing about being in this space and being able to push things forward with companies like yours as well. So
really respect that.
Show where people can get or chat about where people can find more information. And you guys are investing a lot of time and energy into the blog and putting a lot of great content there too. So
yeah, totally. We definitely recommend checking out levelshealth.com/blog, producing new content and collaborating with people like yourself. And so anyone who's listening, please check that out. Send us some feedback on what you'd like to see, what you're interested in learning about the metabolic space and how it relates to the qualitative experiences we have. And then follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Unlock Levels, and give us a shout. The team loves to hear from people and just know how we're resonating and where we can go to make our product better. So I really appreciate all the support.
You got it, Josh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Natural State Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, I'd really appreciate you heading over to whatever service you're listening to this podcast on, dropping me a 5-star review and your thoughts on the show. This helps us get discovered by more people and spreading the good gospel of health. And if you want to stay plugged into all of my self-health experiments, recent research in books that I'm reading and my interpretations of those things, products that I'm testing, and thoughts on all things related to health, check out my free weekly newsletter called The Feed. You can sign up for that at dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. That's dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. Thanks again for tuning in and your support of the Natural State Podcast.